Gil, thank God it's you. You gotta help us.
Well, that's what I'm here for. I mean, you're young, successful, you're naked. You want a car with a radio, right? You kids like music, right? Ha, da 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 da, cha cha cha, cha cha cha.
Wait, don't go! Ah, no, not today, not to Gil. I could taste that sail. I was in the zone. Hi, everybody, and welcome back to the Springfield Googleplex, the movie podcast for Simpson fans, brought to you by thatshelf.com. Each week, we talk about a movie parodied on The Simpsons. Maybe it was The Simpsons that introduced us to the film, or maybe when we finally saw it, we realized, hey, that's where that Simpson joke comes from. Regardless, each week we pick one that one of us hasn't seen or hasn't seen in a while, watch it, and come together to discuss. I'm your host, Adam Scholes, and joining me as always is the Ricky Roma to my Shelley the Machine Levine, my co-host, Nate Story. How are you doing today, old friend?
I'm feeling like a closer, Adam.
Nice.
I've earned
Very
that
good.
Coffee.
Yeah, you've earned that coffee, you've earned that cubicle, and hopefully you've earned that Cadillac.
Yeah.
And
or at least the steak knives.
Yeah, at least we can only hope. Jeez. Well, if it wasn't clear from all these wonderful references, this week we watched the 1992 film adaptation of David Mamet's critically acclaimed play, Glengarry Glen Ross, which you might remember from such Simpson episodes as Season 8's The Twisted World of Marge Simpson and Season 9's Reality Bites. Nope, Season 9's Realty Bites, which is the episode that we're going to be talking about today. Also, welcome back to season, what are we up to now? Season 6? I think this is season 6, Nate.
Yeah, and we're back. We got some good stuff coming up. This one's just the two of us, but we have some more guests coming up in the next few episodes, and it's going to take us all the way to the end of the year. So
yeah, I think we've got a really great season lined up.
Yeah, we got some Halloween episodes. We got a Christmas episode coming up.
Well, non-denominational holiday fun fest.
Yes, my mistake.
Let's we don't want to pick sides here. So, well, okay, let's start by talking about the episode, which for this podcast episode, we're talking about The Simpsons. It's going to be punchy, guys. It's going to be a good one. It's going to be punchy. We're talking about season 9, episode 9, Realty Bites, directed by Swinton O. Scott III and written by Dan Graney. Original air date December 7th, 1997, 5 years after the release of the movie. So, Nate, talk us through the reference and, why you think that they chose to reference Glengarry Glen Ross, which I have to say it's a tongue twister, and I don't think I've ever successfully said the full title of the film without stumbling over my words.
I think it's a very David Mamet title. He loves the sort of like rhythm and repetition stuff, and also what is the word? Alliteration. But yeah, so this episode is the one where Marge becomes a realtor, right?
Yes.
And so I feel like that's probably the origin of like the why for this. Is it's like, well, if you do an episode that's about sales and about real estate, there actually aren't that many movies that kind of play in that territory, and this is sort of one of the quintessential ones.
Yeah, it's funny. I watched it with the commentary this afternoon, and they do sort of reference that it's playing on Glengarry Glen Ross, but there's no real rhyme or reason. I think Mike Scully said, yeah, like I wanted to do Glengarry Glen Ross
right.
or something like that, but that's the extent of it. It's actually one of the duller commentaries that I've listened to for the show. It's kind of, they're about as punchy as we are. They just kind of meander through the episode. And then at some point, another writer shows up, like pokes his head through the door because he shows up early to record his commentary for his episode. So it's funny in that regard, but it's not one of their more insightful episodes.
Al Jean is always really good about talking about the references. But these seasons, like the sort of Scully seasons from like 9 to 12, they don't really talk very much about what they're kind of riffing on and that kind of stuff. They are much more just like, shooting the shit, which is fine. But it does make research for these a lot harder because they don't really give a lot of clues. But my guess is it's just like it makes sense. It's like, well, you're going to do real estate. And so it makes sense to bring in this movie because it's, one of the sort of better known movies of the 90s, I guess, maybe the early 90s. I mean, the late 90s is kind of its own thing, right? 99 in particular is famously a good year for movies. But like, yeah, this is in the early 90s was kind of a big deal and is very quotable, right? So I think that's part of it.
Yes, definitely.
You have Lionel Hutz giving Marge the line, "Cubicles are for closers," which is, of course, from this movie.
Because cubicles are for closers, Marge. Anybody who doesn't sell a house their first week gets fired.
But like the biggest reference and the reason why we wanted to do this movie is because the character of Gil Gunderson, which, you know, I think is an audience favorite. I certainly loved him and remembered him very fondly, is a parody of the main character in this movie, right?
Yeah.
Of Jack Lemmon's protagonist, Shelley the Machine Levine.
Marge, it's a real pleasure. You got any leads? I need some leads, please. Help me.
That's enough, Gil. Don't drag her down with you.
We'll get into it, but it's interesting. I feel like he's really a parody of a very particular part of the character in this movie. Because there's sort of two different Shelleys in this movie. There's like Act 1 Shelley, and then there's Act 2 Shelley.
Yes.
And this is very much Act 1 Shelley, this sort of like desperate, bumbling, you know, people-pleasing sort of character who's always trying to sell, right?
Yeah. And with the stammer and
yeah,
you know, unable to get like a full phrase out, and a vaguely kind of depressing character.
Totally. On the commentary, I don't think they really say whether he was intended to be a one-off character in this episode, and they were like, he was so great that they brought him back, or if they kind of instantly knew that like this character was going to be a sort of pinch hitter, a jack of all trades. But he shows up like so much for the rest of the run that we are covering on this podcast, right?
Well, it's interesting because I thought this was the case, and I just went and checked the Simpsons wiki to confirm. But this is, in fact, the last time Lionel Hutz has a speaking role. This is essentially like the last Phil Hartman performance on the show.
Wow.
Maybe there might be one more Troy McClure after this, but I don't think there is. They very wisely decided after Hartman's untimely death to kind of retire that character.
Yeah.
It's interesting that then the character that starts to appear more is Gil, which in a weird way, there's some parallels to the Lionel Hutz character there.
Yep.
Like you can kind of see they're kind of like two sides of the same coin, maybe. So I don't know. Again, that's just a theory that I'm positing tonight, but I do wonder if that's part of it, is like they lost this one sort of like bumbling goofus of a character, and so they replaced him with sort of a different analog that is a more washed up, depressing kind of version of that.
Yeah. I think like on the show for the side characters, you need these characters that can, you know, when you're thinking of a movie parody or you're thinking of a situation, they can kind of pop in and be joke machines, right? And I feel like Troy McClure is so perfect for that, because it's like anytime there's a TV special, anytime there's an educational film or a shitty movie, he's showing up and being hilarious, right? And Gil, similarly, anytime you need a guy who has a shitty job, there's Gil, right? And so
exactly.
it works really well for that. He also, the other thing that he reminds me a lot of is the yes guy, right? Yes, who was inspired by a character on the Jack Benny show.
Right.
But the interesting thing is the yes guy actually was basically the Gil character on the Jack Benny show.
Oh,
so he would
okay.
show up playing all these different roles where he'd be like, you know, Jack Benny would go to the department store, or he'd go to whatever, and it would always be the yes guy working there.
Interesting.
So,
okay.
Similar sort of thing, but not the same character, not the same attitude, but the same kind of use of that character.
Yeah, it can be slotted in wherever you need a humorous role.
Customer service character.
Yeah. Okay, interesting. That's kind of, that is kind of interesting.
Yeah. But I mean, the other interesting thing about Gil is that this is not the first time that the character of Shelley has been parodied on The Simpsons. So before this, as you said in the intro, you have season 8's The Twisted World of Marge Simpson, where Jack Lemmon, who plays the main character in this movie, guest stars playing basically the character from this movie.
Ooh, you sound like me. Well, the old me, which was, ironically, the young me.
Right, yeah. Okay.
So
I don't know that I would agree that they're... he's a salesman.
They say that's what they say on the commentary, I think.
Oh, really?
Is
Okay,
that
well,
he
there you
is
go.
sort of riffing on that. He's less desperate than Gil is, for sure.
And he's the owner of the company, so...
Right, but it's kind of like a crappy company. Like,
they have there's definitely
the
parallels.
VHS of him like making pretzels, and there's bugs in the flour, and anyway.
Check for Millipedes. Ugh.
But it's interesting because
man.
it's like, I wonder if the experience of having Jack Lemmon guest on the show, like if that had any influence on the creation of Gil, or if it was just, a coincidence, right? Like that.
Well, yeah, it's interesting because in that early, I think it's like season 2.
Yeah.
I think it's One Fish, Two Fish, Three Fish, Blowfish, or whatever the title of the episode is. And Akira is played by George Takei, and then obviously they didn't bring him back every single time, so the character is subsequently voiced by, I think it's Hank Azaria.
I think so, yeah.
Not
anymore.
Not anymore. But an instance of having a character that is played by a celebrity guest star and then is subsequently, played by one of the season regulars. So
Right.
it's a little bit different in that it's a different character, but Gil is definitely sort of in that same mold of the owner of the pretzel wagon.
Yeah. Well, and they kill off the character in that episode. So it's sort of one of those things where I wonder if they kill off the character and then they're like, man, we should have killed off that character. Like, I know it was Jack Lemmon and all, but like that would have been a useful character to have around to like have other jobs and just like come up again and be desperate and funny and nervous.
But you do get a very good gag out of it.
Yeah, right. Well, I need to talk to the executive of his estate.
He's right over there. They were in the same car.
Yeah, I mean, it's dark, but it's funny.
Yes.
What is your take on Gil? Because to me, without being unkind, I went back and watched on YouTube just like a clip reel of like the very best of Gil Gunderson. And there are some funny moments, but it started to feel like he was a character that they kind of just fell to whenever they needed a certain type of joke. And it wasn't necessarily, I don't want to say that they weren't trying very hard, but it kind of had that feeling of like, when people talk about the decline of the Simpsons and all that stuff, it's like the reoccurrence of Gil kind of feels like it's a correlation in that it's a non-important character that starts to show up over and over again, but he's not developed like some of the other recurring characters from the earlier seasons. I don't know, like and maybe it's recency bias or like recency bias of when I was watching the show when it was only 12 seasons in. But.
I mean, I think that part of it is that there wasn't another season 7 and 8. Right, to flesh out some of these characters. I'm sure that in the intervening years where we were not watching the show as much, they did do those episodes where it's like,
maybe
let's do the Gil episode where we find out more about Gil and he interacts more with the family. I'm sure there's an episode like that, but I think that Oakley and Weinstein were so good at bringing humanity to those characters in a way that was really interesting and engaging. And so, like, all of those characters that we really love from those earlier seasons, they all started out like Gil, right? I mean, like, Dr. Nick, right? Or Troy McClure, or, or Mo. Yeah, all those characters were just like, they would show up and do their bit, and then they would go away. And that was kind of enough, right? But it's just that we've had the time and the talented writers to kind of develop those characters in really interesting ways that go beyond their bit and give some depth to them. And I feel like in the first 13 seasons, again, just speaking of the part we're covering, Gil never gets to that point.
Maybe what it is, though, is that those characters that sort of became beloved and started off as, bits and then became more fleshed out, there was always a reason for them to be recurring characters in the sense that like Homer always goes to the bar, so you always are going to see those characters, or like Principal Skinner, well, he is the principal of the school and the kids go to school, and so whereas
Dr.
like Gil
Nick, Disco Stew.
No, but that's the thing. Like, I don't know. Disco Stew pops up like periodically, but I think that's the thing. If Disco Stew had become a truly recurring character that was showing up time and time again, you'd be like, why are you still doing this bit? It's not that funny.
Yeah,
like,
I mean, I did the math, and Gil shows up in 17% of all episodes after his first appearance in season 9 until the end of season 13.
Wow.
So he's in like almost 1 in 5 episodes.
Yeah. So like, yeah, exactly. And so maybe that's what bothers me. I don't know. It's not to say I don't like Gil.
Yeah.
It's just he's not a beloved recurring character to me. Sometimes I think the bit works really well. I think of the episode where he's on the, I don't remember the context, but he's like on the phone and he's like, you want me to dance? I'm a dancing. Like that one is hilarious to me.
No, please, you gotta help old Gil. What's it gonna take to keep you on the phone? Dance for you, but you wouldn't even see it. All right, I'm dancing.
Where Or the hot plate line is really funny when he's like, "Oh,
Right.
I had 2 more payments on."
That whole bit is great. That's the episode where Marge and Homer get stuck naked and they're running around and there's all the shenanigans, right? And they run into Gil at the used car lot or whatever, and he's trying to be really hip and helpful because he's trying to make a sale. And then they get in his hot air balloon, and he says he was living in there.
Yeah. So I don't know. It's just watching this compilation, and maybe it was because they were all back to back. I don't know. There was something about it that didn't have me sort of chuckling in the same way that a back to back, the best of Mo or the best of Apu or the best of Lenny. Oh man,
Well,
I should have watched the best of Lenny.
We should all watch the best of Lenny.
Yeah, not Lenny. I guess that's kind of my weird Gil take.
I mean, I watched the same video because when you Google, this is what comes up. And it's hard because it's there are a lot of episodes that he's in. So I was like, how do I narrow this down? I'm not going to watch all these episodes. I do think that there's something about watching them all in quick succession that really lessens the impact of Gil,
right?
Because he adds this sort of depressing, almost realistic element to the show that is adds a different kind of humor in context, because often there's all sorts of crazy shenanigans going on, especially in these seasons when he's showing up. Because again, the first episode he appears is season 9, right? Yeah. So we're already in wacky zone. And so, it's Homer and Marge are running around the city naked and and that kind of stuff. And Gil is worried about his hot plate, right? I think that he adds just a different flavor of humor to the mix that I really appreciate in these seasons. One of my favorite scenes is, I think it's actually the first one in that compilation, was the scene where Homer gets dragged into the IRS and Gil is there.
Yes.
Right. And he's like,
"Oh, this is bad. This is really bad. You work and you slave and you steal just enough for a sweet lick of that shiny brass ring. Don't I get a lick? Doesn't Gil get a lick?"
There's no punchline,
No.
But it's just funny because he's so sad and depressing and desperate.
Dan's performance is very, very good. He sells the bit, and he does the Jack Lemmon impression that's just different enough that
it's
it
Frink.
doesn't. Yeah, it's it's not Mayor Quimby is clearly JFK. It's different enough that it does feel like its own character. But when you put him up against Jack Lemmon's actual performance, you're like, oh yeah, it's not that close. But in your mind, you're like, yeah, he's doing a Jack Lemmon type.
Right.
And I think those are kind of where it's the best, when it's it's not really an impression, but it's close enough that you make that association.
Well, it's Mo is Pacino. He's just a gravelly version of Pacino in Dog Day Afternoon, famously.
Yeah. Yes, exactly.
But that's the best, is that it's they just allow the imperfect impression to kind of get its own gravity, right? Or its own momentum.
Well, and Homer was famously Walter Matthau
Right.
in the earliest years.
Jack Lemmon's buddy.
Yeah, exactly. There you go. So there should have been a Homer Gil odd couple episode.
Oh, I mean, that's a great idea.
Well,
they reference the Odd Couple.
We know a couple writers. We could maybe pitch an idea here. Send in a spec script.
That's true.
Okay, well, but the thing that was also surprising about this episode and all the best episodes that we cover is that it's chock full of other movie references,
right?
In addition to the subtle Glengarry Glen Ross references. So, what were some of the other things that this episode touched on?
Yeah, well, so of course you actually we'll cut it out, but you flubbed the title of the episode with one.
No, we can keep it in. That's fine.
Okay,
that's
well, fair enough. With one of the references, which is Reality Bites, of course. This is another classic version of the title references, like we were talking about in 32 Short Films About Glenn Gould, where it's well, this is kind of a more indie movie. Maybe seems a little outside the taste of the writers, dare I say. Chalkboard Gag also has a reference. There was no Roman god named Farticus, which of course is a reference to Spartacus.
That's a Kubrick movie I want to see.
Farticus. I don't know. He might actually go for it.
Yeah, I feel like his brand of humor was a little bit ribald.
Yes,
like that,
scatological.
So. Yeah.
Of course, one of the big ones is Psycho, right?
Yes.
So the murder house that Marge is trying to sell as part of this episode is the house from Psycho. It looks exactly, at least the exterior looks exactly like it. The interior doesn't look almost anything like it.
No.
Has actually a little bit more of a Shining vibe, I would say, to it. It's more big and cavernous. And whereas the Psycho house just looks like a house on the interior. But you also have the score from Psycho. Not the famous violin sting. But the main score that you hear like over the credits is used in this episode.
Yeah, the
quite or sound like. Yeah, exactly.
Now, the copyright bullies are coming.
Exactly. So
The estate of Bernard Herrmann.
right. And on a similar note, The Shining, right? Of course.
Of course.
You have Todd saying, red room, over there, with his finger. I feel like I quoted that all the time. And then finally, this one again is like, it's kind of more of a genre parody maybe, but I think it's fair to say that it's a parody of Dirty Harry, which is the scene where Lionel Hutz is chewing out Marge in his office for all of the damage that she's caused. Right. And it's sort of like, again, this has been done in a million cop movies, but I feel like it was really popularized by Dirty Harry and then parodied and kind of stolen by like every movie after that.
Right.
There were also a few like mystery references that I couldn't peg. The commentary didn't clarify. So I wonder if you have any thoughts on these. The first one is when Marge is in the real estate office and she finally gets her red jacket. Mm-hmm. There's a moment where she sort of spins around and there's a score sort of element to it. And then she says a line that's about like living up to the values that the jacket represents.
Thank you, everybody. I'm going to do my darndest to uphold the principles and ideals this jacket represents.
It's got to be a reference to something, and I don't know what.
Yeah, I don't know either. She's kind of doing like the Sound of Music spin around.
It looks a bit like that, for sure.
But it also feels a bit like the Mary Tyler Moore opening. Are you familiar with the opening of Mary Tyler Moore show?
Yes, and they have parodied that before.
Yeah.
We're gonna make it out.
Yeah, and Homer throws the bowling ball in the air and then... Yeah, so that was where my mind immediately went. But it might be like the Skinner stalking Bart thing where it's
Could be.
It feels like it should be a reference, but maybe it's not really, and it's just a interesting bit of direction on the part of the animators.
See,
but
I was thinking that it must be a college movie of some kind or a private school movie about getting a jacket. Like that moment in a movie where it's like someone gets a Yale jacket, I don't know, or something like that, where
like
it's
a golf jacket, maybe like Tin Cup. Maybe it's Tin Cup.
I don't know.
I've never seen Tin Cup.
Right. It feels like it could be like a coming of age sort of movie somehow. Yeah. That's what sort of came to mind to me, but I have no idea. So that was a mystery. The other one, which again is kind of a genre parody, but probably is a parody of something more specific, is the whole car fight between Homer and Snake in this episode.
Right.
They have a 70s cop show / movie soundtrack to it that is very distinctive, but like I couldn't actually figure out what it's from.
So when I was listening to the commentary, it's kind of thrown away, but they say we're using our generic sort of our 70s cop music that's based on The Rookies. And I was like, okay, well, what's The Rookies? And it was a 70s TV series, like a 70s cop show about these rookie cops. And I went and listened to the opening titles music, and it doesn't sound that similar, but like it definitely has a similar enough vibe that I think it's just meant to be like generic 70s cop music, but that's the show that they specifically call out.
Right.
But as I said, it's such a thrown away moment that if you're not really paying attention, and The Rookies is such a generic title that like you wouldn't necessarily even catch that that's what he's saying.
And it's not one that like people talk about in the same way that they talk about like Dragnet.
Yeah, literally never heard of it. Like my dad has maybe, if I were to bring it up to my dad, he might be like, oh yeah, of course, that aired on ABC on Thursday nights or something like that. But I have obviously never heard of it. So
Adam, was there anything else in this episode that like stood out to you as like memorable or just funny?
No, I mean, it is an episode that I really enjoy. I would not put it in my ever-growing outside of the top 10.
Right.
But it is one of my favorite of the season, certainly.
Yeah.
There's so many like great little moments. Like I love when the kids are pretending to be adults and, you know, they're dressed in the way they're dressed. And just the way that Lisa is dismissive of Bart.
So, you're married and you're looking for your first house, Mr. and Mrs.
Superman. Oh, don't listen to my husband. He's just an idiot.
And again, great line reading.
Bart's throwaway line, should have moved in together first.
Yeah, well, and I also love when she says, like, I'm a veterinarian. Are we allowed to have pets? And he says, not in my damn house.
Yeah, right.
Oh, yeah, and then another thing. I think this is the introduction of the expression booyah.
Really?
Booyah!
Certainly, this was the first time I heard it, and I remember, like, me and my friends in, like, it would have been around the 6th grade, we started using booyah all the time, and I think this was the first time I ever heard it, and for whatever reason, it, like, stuck.
Weird. I had never thought of where that came from, but that makes some sense to me. I mean...
Yeah, I don't know if it originated on the show or if they were just, like, they heard it and then sort of brought it into the popular lexicon or what the situation was. I do remember, this is such a weird thing, I remember in grade 6, our grade 6 gym class, we had, like, a student teacher. Like, remember when, like, teachers would be in teachers college and then they sort of, like, come into your classroom for a period to, like, they're learning how to be a teacher from real teachers. Anyway, so we had a student teacher, gym teacher, and I was, unsurprisingly, based on my love of The Simpsons, was not a big fan of gym class. But I remember he came in and he introduced some, like, game that he invented, and it involved the Booyah chicken. And so he had, like, a rubber chicken, and I guess, like, when you completed something, you were supposed to grab the chicken and slam it against the floor and say booyah.
I see.
And so the Booyah chicken is just something that is engraved in my mind. But again, like, booyah by that era, by like 99, 2000, like, had broken into the popular lexicon. So, but I think this was the show that kind of, like, made it break through. I don't know.
It could also be one of those things where it was like a subcultural thing, and then, like, once the Simpsons used it, then it, like, became a thing that, like, let's be real, white straight people started saying.
Yeah, exactly. And that very well may be the case. I don't know. But I do remember, like, this is my first recollection of ever hearing booyah. And certainly, like, we being me and my, like, small friend group in middle school, certainly started using that phrase all the time.
Fascinating. I had not thought of that, but that seems very plausible. I really love the cold open to this episode.
I love these lazy Saturdays.
It's Wednesday, Homer.
Work!
I love how he clips on his tie onto his pajamas.
Right, and runs out. And then just the whole scene of Homer eating popcorn with his tongue, which is definitely something I have done in real life.
Oh, I do it all the time whenever I go to the movies.
But it's great observational humor, right?
Yeah,
because
totally.
he's being very unattractive in a way that feels relatable. This is one of those few episodes, too, where the A plot and the B plot properly dovetail, where you have the whole realty thing with Marge, that's kind of the A plot, and then you have Homer with his stupid car, and then it all just kind of, like, coming together, literally crashing together at the very end, which is always very satisfying when they're able to pull that off.
And it also does my favorite thing of, like, you know, maybe the first 3/4 of the first act have absolutely nothing to do with the rest of the episode.
Yeah.
Which I always love.
I feel like this one actually does a good job of having that dynamic a little bit, but then also it feels more logical than sometimes when they do that. I think it's because Act 1 becomes the B plot.
Yes.
But then there's an A plot that emerges out of the Act 1 as well.
And then there's a final payoff.
Right, and then there's a final payoff.
Together.
Now that we're talking about it, I'm like, actually, it's very impressive that they were able to kind of, like, pull all of that off. Because usually it is much more like of a complete 180 in the story after Act 1. But in this one, they actually managed to kind of hold it all together, and it really makes sense as a story in a weird way. Let's see. I do like, she needs premium, dude. Premium. I feel like that was also one that I quoted a lot when I was younger.
You were a big jailbird / snakehead.
I love Snake.
I would say.
Snake is great.
I love when Homer tries to goad Skinner into a drag race, and he talks about how he lost his high school girlfriend, and then
My high school sweetheart was killed in a drag racing accident.
Come on, it'll be fun.
That's what Debbie Sue said.
like it's more specifically the line reading. I mean, it's dark, but it's dark in the way that only The Simpsons can pull off.
It's very much in the spirit of Gil, where it's like, it's funny because it's adding a sense of reality to an otherwise completely ridiculous show. And then at the complete opposite extreme of that, you have the scene where Snake is setting up a trap like a Wile E. Coyote situation. Where he's got, like, is it piano wire or something like that he's setting up across the street.
Yeah.
And then, and Homer's coming along with the car and he's standing up and he says, "Man, the air feels good on my neck."
It's so dumb.
Oh, it's so good. And then of course he ducks at the last minute. But then you have the double fake out of
Yes.
Kirk Van Houten coming along next in a car complaining that the guy didn't slice his sandwich properly. And,
waving his sandwich in the air as one does.
right. And then he just gets his arms cut off.
Yeah. It healed easily, so that's good. That's Kirk
right.
was fine.
That's right. In classic Simpsons fashion.
All right. Well, on that note, let's talk about the film and dig a little bit deeper into Glengarry Glen Ross, which as you mentioned, was written by David Mamet. I feel like we should just sort of like right out of the gate before we dig too deeply. What's your relationship with Mamet? Because like, to me, he's one of those like classic, I've heard this name 1,000 times and he's like considered one of the most important playwrights of like the 20th century or whatever, but I don't really know that much of his work, which is weird to me. I've seen a couple of the films that he's written or directed, but like I'm not super familiar with him. And maybe it's just because we were like theater kids, but like I knew the name David Mamet, but couldn't necessarily like tell you anything about him.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, honestly, I have pretty much the exact same relationship with him, which is that he's just it's a name that I know. I've definitely seen a few of the movies that he's written. I'm just looking at his IMDb right now. It's like I've seen Hannibal, I've seen Ronin.
Wait, Hannibal? Did he write Hannibal?
Yeah.
Oh, he meant, like the screenplay.
Screenplay, yeah.
Oh,
yeah.
Wow.
So he wrote a bunch of stuff like that it's like you wouldn't necessarily know that he wrote that. Oh, and The Untouchables. I've seen The Untouchables.
Yeah, that's like the one thing that I genuinely love.
Yeah.
I've seen House of Games. Wag the Dog I've seen.
Right.
It's interesting though, watching the film, one of my notes was Mamet like the 80s / early 90s Aaron Sorkin?
Yeah, I think that's a good comp because this movie, I think in some ways is probably what David Mamet is most known for.
I think that's fair.
And I think like much like Sorkin, the thing that he's known for is his dialogue.
Yeah, exactly. Everybody talks about Mamet's dialogue and the sort of like the pace of his dialogue and the repartee that they get, and that's sort of how everybody talks about Sorkin. So, and then similarly, like Mamet then starts directing his own work, which Sorkin has started to do. And I don't necessarily think Sorkin's as strong of a director as he is a writer. I know that people don't have this take, but like I love Sorkin's writing.
I like Sorkin's writing. I mean, I think that sometimes he can overreach a little bit when it comes to his philosophical takes on things, I guess.
You mean like in that episode of The Newsroom when the guy, I just want to tell you, sir, on behalf of, we got Osama bin Laden or whatever the line is. I mean, it's a little much.
He can overdo it. It was very well tuned to 90s politics. Like The West Wing at the time was kind of like mostly pretty pitch perfect. And then the world moved on politically. And I don't think that he's as well suited to where we are politically right now. But then you have something like Steve Jobs, which is just like, it's not about politics. And it's great. I think it's a great script. But I don't know why we're talking about Aaron Sorkin.
Because, fair enough.
But
okay.
I mean, but David Mamet, I do think is sort of similar in terms of that. And I do think this is sort of the pinnacle of that. I mean, again, we'll get to it, but the play won the Pulitzer Prize, right?
Yeah.
And so it's sort of like, I think that you could say that this is probably the quintessential David Mamet piece. I'm sure there's someone who knows more about him out there that disagrees, but in my limited understanding, that seems like a fair take.
And we'll get to it a little bit later, but I did actually read a bunch of the play this afternoon just because I wanted to like have a comparison point. And it's
Adam, as we're starting to get into the movie, how would you sum this movie up in a sentence?
The world's worst real estate salesman. How would I describe? Yeah, like a bunch of down on their luck real estate salesmen have 1 week to turn their careers around, or they're fired.
Sure. Yeah. That's pretty good.
I mean, there's more to it than that, but that's at least the setup of the film.
Yeah. I would say that's like the premise of the film.
Yeah.
And then there's sort of a plot that emerges from that situation.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, fair enough. Do you have any background with this film, or was it a mystery box for you?
Well, my background with it was like, this was a film that I feel like, much like The Big Lebowski, a film which up until recently I had never seen before, a generation of men specifically, older than me, constantly referenced, and I had never seen it, but also kind of had no interest in seeing it. A couple of the podcasts that I listen to that are completely non-adjacent to this show, like tech podcasts and stuff like that, a bunch of those hosts were all huge fans of it and were constantly referencing it. Like, I knew ABC Always Be Closing.
Right.
In a weird way, because of the number of references I heard to it, I didn't feel like I ever needed to see it, because it was like, well, I feel like I kind of understand the basic premise of this movie. And obviously I don't work in sales. Sales was such a big job in the like 90s and early 2000s, especially amongst a certain like generation of, again, men. It was just sort of this like totem for them of like, oh yeah, this is us represented on screen, or like our world represented on screen. So no, I'd never seen it prior to watching it for this, but also just like had no real desire to, like, despite the stacked cast, despite the fact that it was written by David Mamet, and despite the fact that allegedly, based on what I read, it's considered to be one of the best films from the 90s, which, hot take, I do not understand how people think that. But
again, it's like, maybe if you divide the 90s in half.
Yeah, maybe.
And you're
maybe.
like, this is one of the most important movies of the early 90s, the first half of the 90s. I feel like you could make a stronger case. But as soon as you include the late 90s, there's like, no way. Maybe the top 50 movies.
But also, like, Silence of the Lambs comes out the year before, and that movie eats this movie for lunch, no pun intended, with a nice Chianti.
Fava beans, yeah.
What about you? What was your relationship with it?
Yeah, I mean, now that you're saying all of that, I kind of agree that I think this movie has a bit of a bro-y reputation.
Yeah.
I think that's...
And to be clear, the podcast hosts that like this movie are not bros, but it's just, they are sort of like that late, not quite boomers, but like Gen X-ish probably,
Sure.
or like whatever's in between boomers and Gen X, or maybe are those back to back? I don't know. But anyway, it's people, guys in their like 40s and 50s love this movie.
Yeah, I feel like it is in some ways a very Gen X-y kind of movie in a certain way. I mean, it feels so similar in some ways to Wall Street. Capitalism is not on your side. No. And it's not a meritocracy. It's like the people who get the leads are the people who are already winning. That's the message of this movie, right?
Yeah.
But at the same time, that's not the message that people took away from it. Much like Fight Club is another movie that
I was literally just going to say
fits into the same type of movie where it's like, if you understand it, the message is maybe completely different than what a whole wide group of people take away from the movie. And they take away the bro-y, annoying, macho bullshit that this movie is kind of being critical of.
Yeah. No, I was literally going to say, like, we referenced 1999 being the greatest year of movies in the 90s, and like Fight Club comes out, and that's the quintessential movie that like dude bros completely miss the point of and cite as their favorite movie, but like don't understand that you're not supposed to want to be Tyler Durden.
Right.
That he is not the good guy.
Yeah.
And this movie kind of feels that way. It's the Fight Club of 1992. So
right. Like, does anyone want to be Shelley the Machine Levine? Or does everyone want to be like Ricky Roma or whatever Alec Baldwin's character's name is, Blake, I think, in this movie?
Yeah.
Like, I think that people want to be Roma and Blake, but they don't get that, like, Shelley Levine is like a tragic character in this. He was in a no-win situation and tried to take things into his own hands and just made things worse, right? Yeah, and like that's what the story's about. It's not about Blake's fucking watch, right? Or his fancy car or his brass balls. And like, but that's the thing that people take away. Yeah. So I feel like that's the reputation that it had for me coming into this, is that it's sort of a superhero team-up movie of good actors, supposedly. But all of the quotes that you hear from this movie are kind of like macho shit that you'd hear quoted from Fight Club or quoted from Wall Street or that kind of thing. So, yeah.
Well, let's do our plot synopsis, which you managed to track down from the 1993 VHS, so probably the original
the
home
first
video
one.
release.
Yeah.
So here's what it has to, or how it describes Glengarry Glen Ross. Al Pacino, Jack Lemmon, Alec Baldwin, and Ed Harris shine in the... Oh, poor Alan Arkin. Like, there's the one other guy in this movie. Okay.
Seriously. Well, and Spacey's also not there.
Oh, okay. Well, fair enough.
But
okay.
who cares?
Shine in this powerful story set in the world of real estate. Times are tough at Premier Properties. Shelley the Machine Levine and Dave Moss are veteran salesmen, but only Ricky Roma is on a hot streak. The new Glengarry sales leads could turn everything around, but the front office is holding them back until these losers prove themselves. Then someone decides to take matters into his own hands, stealing the Glengarry leads and leaving everyone wondering who did it. And I will say, going into this, I wasn't sort of expecting this to be a kind of like whodunit type movie. And when that was the sort of like turning point, that won me over because like for the first sort of half up until the burglary, I was like admiring the cinematography and obviously admiring the performances, but I'm kind of like, where the hell is this going?
Right.
And then when you get to the break-in and then like trying to figure out who done it, and the film does a very, very good job of not playing its hand and leaving it very sort of open-ended as to like who is responsible for this.
And there's some good twists as well. Yep.
So that as someone who has always loved a mystery and a whodunit, like that sort of saved this film for me, because without that twist or that element of it, I don't think I would have been that interested in this.
Yeah.
Like the first half of the movie kind of like, despite the dialogue and the very strong performances, it's heading in that direction of like, okay, this is just like a performance piece, and wasn't expecting it to actually get as plot heavy as it did.
Yeah. It reminded me of another movie, and I can't remember which one it was, where they're sort of setting up all of the dominoes and then they let it go, right?
Right.
Because the whole first act is basically just setting up all of the moving parts.
Yeah.
And then the second act is one scene.
Yeah.
It's basically just one continuous scene until the end where they're in the office and it's all basically happening in real time.
Almost like a play. We'll get into it, though. We'll get into it.
Well, it is true. Like the first act is where they added the content in this movie and made it more cinematic. And the second act plays out a lot like a stage play. For better or worse, I don't mind it. I don't mind.
Well,
but
we'll get into it. But give me a little bit of history. Like, how did this whole thing come together? I mean, you already alluded to the fact that, yes, this was based on a play and that the play won a Pulitzer Prize. But how does this movie end up getting made about 10 years later?
Yeah, so basically, producer Jerry Tukovsky approaches Mamet about an adaptation. He's interested in doing it. I mean, again, it's not rocket science. This is a play that won the Pulitzer Prize. Right? Yeah. So it's like the interest is clear why they would want to make the movie. But he approaches him, and good for Mamet, he negotiates a $500,000 film option and then another $500,000 to write the screenplay.
All right.
Yeah.
Well played, sir.
Yes, he didn't leave anything on the table. So that's good for him. This is another one of those movies where, like, throughout the 80s, it's kind of like Batman. There's all these different directors attached, all of these different potential actors in the roles. So we start out with Arthur Hiller as the director, then Sidney Lumet.
Ooh.
Yeah, which would be different. And that one was originally going to star potentially Bruce Willis and Robert De Niro.
Ooh, I don't like that, though.
I know, and I'm like, in what roles? Which one's which?
Yeah, that's not...
Is Bruce Willis Shelley, or is he Roma? And
he's got to be Roma.
He's got to be Roma, right? But then, yuck. And then Robert De Niro is in the Jack Lemmon role. I mean, I don't know. It just doesn't work for me.
Neither of those guys should be in the... Yeah, that's...
Not in those roles, not in the lead roles.
I'm into Sidney Lumet making this movie, but I'm not into those actors being in it. So.
Yeah, well, you'll get another shot at Lumet.
Okay, well, there you go.
So Lumet is out. And then Ulu Grosbard, a director I'm not familiar with, was brought on potentially for a while. This version would have had De Niro and Pacino reunited and actually interacting with each other. And this would have been preheat, exactly.
Yeah.
Then Sidney Lumet comes back with Pacino and Lemmon in the race. So that almost happened, and then Lumet dropped out at the last minute. In the sort of like final race to the finish, other actors that were sort of up for roles were Richard Dreyfuss.
I could see him being in this. Definitely.
Mickey Rourke, which I mean, yes,
for the time makes sense
in this era. Like he definitely fits in there. This is like pre-Mickey Rourke imploding, and definitely playing a lot of sleazeballs. Ron Silver and Beau Bridges.
Oh wow!
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Interesting.
So kind of interesting, but again, it was just like kind of this revolving door of people. And now the final director who gets this movie, James Foley. Mm-hmm. So when I started looking more into this guy, I am kind of baffled that he directs this movie, right? Yeah. Based on just where he's coming from.
Yeah.
The story of how he gets it is basically just like his agent brings him the script. And he's like, I'll do it as long as I can have great actors. Great.
Cool.
But like he must have got it late in the game. It sounds like the great actors were already kind of lined up. And, and it just worked out really well to him. But like before this, he had kind of a movie that didn't do very well, but got some people's attentions called Reckless, which interestingly was written by Christopher Columbus. And Christopher Columbus now disowns it. And was basically like, I hate what James Foley did with it. He like changed a bunch of stuff and didn't even like talk to me about it. So that guy.
Right.
So fine. But they were kind of coming up around the same time, I guess, which makes sense. He then did 2 neo-noirs, which makes sense with this movie, called At Close Range and After Dark, My Sweet.
Okay.
Which again, I've never really heard of either of these movies. Yeah. But they do have like real people in them. I can't remember who's in At Close Range, but it's like maybe Walken is in one of them.
Okay.
But these movies did not do well at the box office, but they were pretty well received critically. So I feel like that was maybe his saving grace. And then the other big thing he's done is that he had this collaboration with Madonna. So he did several Madonna music videos.
Right, because he directed the Madonna movie, Who's That Girl, right?
Yes, and then he did Who's That Girl. So it's like that would give you a certain amount of cachet, but like it's super weird that then your next thing after all of that is to work with like Pacino and Jack Lemmon and like and doing a David Mamet play. It's like there's definitely a little noirish quality to it. Like I would say David Mamet's dialogue is somewhat noirish.
Yep, definitely. And certainly the cinematography approach, at least for Act 1.
Yes, it's very
the first half.
Neo-Noir. It's kind of in the same vein as like Blood Simple, that kind of feel.
Definitely.
So yeah, on one hand, it kind of makes sense tonally, but it's also just like, this feels like a big step up, though, from where he was before. And then subsequently, he has kind of a weird career after this.
He sure does.
But like the things that everyone would know him from now are he's directed several episodes of House of Cards, also with Kevin Spacey, which again, I'm kind of like, well, then that guy. And then the other thing he's done is the 2 sequels to 50 Shades of Grey.
Yeah. Which I have not, I've only seen the first 50 Shades of Grey.
I haven't seen any of them.
Because, well, no, I will say, like, I mean, it horribly written, like, just everything about it is horrible, except for the fact that it is a gorgeously directed movie.
Fascinating.
Like, it looks, the first one anyway, is, because it's directed by Sam Taylor Johnson, who, she's fine. But like famously, it's edited by Ann V. Coates, like world famous editor. And I think she was like 90 when she edited it. Like crazy. But anyway, I don't want to say the movie is good, but the movie looks incredible.
Sure.
My wife was like, she read the books. And so when the movie came out, we watched it together. And I was like, I always force you to watch the stuff I want to watch. So it's the least I can do. And I came away from it being like, well, this was insufferable dialogue read by relatively insufferable actors, but like at least it looks incredible. So,
right. Well, and I would say in terms of subject matter, totally fits in with the other stuff that James Foley has done. Right. Because like I was looking at his early stuff, they're all these kind of like up romances, right? Like that kind of thing. And the other movie that I realized that I have actually seen of his.
Yes. I was wondering if you were going to pick up on this.
Oh, yes, is Fear.
Yeah.
Starring Marky Mark and Grissom from CSI.
You can't see this, but I am beating my chest,
Yes.
a la Matthew McConaughey in the Wolf of Wall Street.
Yes.
But Marky Mark
But also
does that.
Marky Mark.
This is the movie
Fear.
where Marky Mark finger bangs Reese Witherspoon on a roller coaster.
That does happen. He also writes Nicole Forever on his chest, which, as in number 4 and Eva, EVA.
You know who introduced me to that movie? Yeah, your wife.
My wife.
We watched it for the first time on one of many rainy days in our dorm room.
Yes.
She's like, "Have you ever seen the movie Fear with Marky Mark?" And I was like, "No, of course I haven't seen the movie Fear with Marky Mark."
She owned it on
like, well,
DVD.
you will today.
That
Yep,
movie,
she certainly did.
That movie is still in our house today.
Well,
so there you go.
there
Big
you go.
James Foley fans in this household.
Yeah, exactly.
But again,
Wow.
like, it actually is very in line with all of the other movies that he's done, except this one, which has no women in it to speak of.
No, I don't think it has any.
No women.
Like, there's women referenced, but we
Yes.
never see a woman.
Yes. Which I actually, you know what? I will say it makes sense for this movie because this is also a movie about masculinity. Like,
absolutely.
I think it's actually very intentional that this is a movie of all men. Whereas in other movies, I'd be like, that's ridiculous. But like,
Well, also, it's a cast of what, like 6 actors?
yeah, but
ostensibly?
it's not a diverse. There's no diversity in this cast.
No.
You know, so it's
Well,
like
there is a Chinese restaurant though, so
the restaurant's
some
diverse.
diversity. Yeah, exactly.
But you don't see any waiters, waitresses, owners, or anyone else. It's just these, like, whatever it is, 6 to 8 white guys. But I guess, like, I do think that there's maybe something going on here of, like, if you pay attention to some of the last names, I know this is like really getting deep here, but like the main characters are all white ethnic characters, right? In the sense of, like, their grandparents were probably immigrants, right? Like Italian Americans, Jewish immigrants. I think there's some Irish names in there. And then, you know, the one sort of last name that you get of a bad guy, right? The Kevin Spacey character is Williamson, which is sort of a more English name. Right. I do think that that's kind of intentional. That's more like a class divide when you're talking about America. So anyway, the only other piece of interesting, you know, like history about the making of this movie that I found was just that they did do a lot of rehearsal, as you might imagine, for this, because
you'd have to.
Yeah, there are long takes and there are long scenes in this. So they did a 3-week rehearsal, 39-day shoot. And a lot of it is shot in sequence and all of that. So it's like they actually did these scenes front to back, which is pretty impressive. And I do think you can tell, even when there is cutting, the rhythm of it feels very naturalistic and has a really nice rhythm to it.
So, okay, so I want to lead off with one of my classic Scholes scorching hot takes. So are you ready for
Scorching Skulls? Yeah.
Scorching Skulls, here we go. Is this the most overrated film that we've watched so far? Because, again, I alluded to this earlier, and again, this is according to Wikipedia, so, like, I don't know how accurate it is because they don't really cite any sources. But it says, like, you know, it's widely regarded as one of the best films of the 90s.
Wow.
It's sort of like your hot take of Batman and Robin is one of the best comedies of the 90s, which you know, this is a side plug for the Spoiled Rotten podcast that Nate and I both appeared on. Possibly not yet, possibly already has occurred. We don't know because time has no meaning in the podcast world. But,
that's true.
Yeah, reading that, I just sort of was like, what are you talking about? No, this would not crack my top 10, top 20 best films of the 1990s.
Right.
But it feels so overrated to me watching it.
So, but the way you ask the question is of anything we've covered so far. So I'm like looking back here. I feel like almost anything I say otherwise is going to be a scorching hot take because some of these are very clearly not as good as this movie. And then some of the other ones are considered masterpieces of one kind or another, right?
But that's what I mean. So, like...
I might say Full Metal Jacket.
Oh, that's a hot take.
I know. But again, it's not that is a worse movie than this movie. That's not what you asked. You asked what is the most overrated movie? And I think that movie has some amazing highs, but is an incredibly flawed movie that doesn't really hold together in a lot of ways, isn't even the best Vietnam movie out there. So that might be the other one that I feel like is in contention for me.
The only other one that, and again, this will literally get my cinephile card revoked, shredded, and kicked out of the club. The only other one I would maybe say is Pulp Fiction.
Oh, Adam, no way.
But I still think this is more overrated because at the same, as much as I don't like Pulp Fiction, I understand what it did for cinema from that point onward.
Yeah.
So for me, it's more just it's a taste thing.
But it's not necessarily that it's not as good as people say it is. That's the key question.
I might not think it's as good as people say it is, but I cannot deny that what it is doing is impressive and important and iconic and blah, 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 blah,
Okay.
blah. Whereas here, I don't think I can make that argument.
I got another one for you. The Natural.
But, I don't know anybody who thinks that movie is good.
I think people who know about that movie really love that movie.
Okay, maybe.
But I don't know. But I'm not sure if people who love that movie are like, that's a good movie. Or if they're just like, I love that movie.
Yeah, because that movie was not on my radar at all prior to us covering it. So that's why, whereas this was, that's what I mean. That's
true.
This was a movie that I had heard so much about and kind of went into it being like, okay, you need to be masterpiece level.
Yeah.
And I don't think it is.
Well,
I will agree with you, though, that Full Metal Jacket might be the only other one that gives it a run for its money.
But only because its reputation is so stellar, I feel like. I think a lot of people are like, it's a masterpiece, and I don't.
Yeah, but as I said in that episode, if that movie ends at the 40-minute mark, it's a 5-star masterpiece.
I agree.
Whereas if this movie ends at the 40-minute, if this ends at the act break, it's not a 5-star masterpiece.
But what if it started at the act break?
No, because you need that lead up to set up all those characters.
What if you could read the first act on Wikipedia as a summary, and then just watch the second act?
And we're gonna get to this, but maybe the play.
Oh, okay.
Could be considered a 5-star masterpiece.
Well, I mean, it did win the Pulitzer Prize, so that seems like a fair bet.
Maybe that is a perfect segue to that question as well that I sort of wanted to ask you, which is, do you think this movie can escape its origins as a play? Because we've talked about this a couple times, about how stage to film adaptations tend to feel really stagey and tend to show their source of being stage work. I mean, we did an entire musical miniseries.
Right.
Where a lot of those were, if not all of them, were based on stage shows. And some of the films succeeded, some of them didn't. Do you think this succeeds in its translation to the big screen? Or does it ultimately kind of still feel like a stage play that's maybe been opened up a little bit, but still feels very theatrical in a bad way?
It goes back and forth a little bit. I never felt like it felt small to me.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
They did smartly add a few things that I think help a lot. The first half basically is during a rainstorm at night, which is all added for the movie, just to actually have some more atmosphere and kind of show the passage of time. So I feel like that was a really smart, simple, straightforward addition. The scene where Shelley goes to that guy's house to try to make the sale, the therapist from Matchstick Men, that's how I know him. He that was added from to the movie as well, which again I think was smart because you actually see them going out, going in a car, going door to door, getting in these phone booths, making calls. Especially the first half doesn't just take place in the office or in the restaurant. So I feel like those were smart additions.
Well, and the biggest addition, of course, is the Alec Baldwin character.
Right. But that I don't think... that doesn't change the dynamic of whether it feels like a play or not, though, to me.
No, because that is very much a monologue that you would expect from a play. But that whole sequence, that is not in the play. That character doesn't exist. It sets the stakes very, very well.
Yeah.
And it becomes probably the most quoted
Yeah.
part of the movie are the parts from that Alec Baldwin monologue.
Definitely.
A, B, C. A, always B, B, C, closing. Always be closing. Always be closing.
And you even sent me the like Saturday Night Live parody that they do at the North Pole
With Alec Baldwin.
with Alec Baldwin playing the same
head
role
elf.
essentially.
Yeah.
And you know, my boy Seth Meyers and my girlfriend Amy Poehler featured.
Always be always be cobbling. Always be cobbling.
So that becomes like the most iconic thing that everybody knows, and it's not the thing from the play.
But like, let's just pause and think about that for a second. David Mamet writes a Pulitzer Prize winning play.
Yeah.
Then they're going to do a movie adaptation. He's like, I think I want to with it more. I think I'm going to change it. And he adds a monologue to a movie.
Yeah.
Right? That is like, I don't even know. It's got to be over 5 minutes, right?
At least.
It's
probably about 10 minutes.
Of just like Alec Baldwin talking and holding space in this room. It's crazy. Like, talk about brass balls. I mean, that's an insane move when you have this thing that has been acknowledged as pretty much as perfect as it can be. And then he's like, no, I've got to change it again. I'm going to add this whole thing.
Well, and I will give him credit that he does the thing that we've talked about a lot, and this idea of adaptation, and you have to adapt to the medium. And granted, a monologue is not a very filmic device, so like that's maybe, you know, a little bit different, and that sort of is, again, the Mamet being Mamet. But I read through or skimmed the sort of first act of the play, because that seems to be the thing that is the most different.
Yep.
And it's interesting. The play opens with Shelley confronting Williamson about needing better leads.
Right, like the scene in the bathroom in the movie.
Well, it's a combination of the scene in the bathroom and the scene in the car.
Oh, okay.
But those two scenes, and it all takes place in the Chinese restaurant.
Right.
So the whole first act takes place in the Chinese restaurant, and it basically seems to be going from like booth to booth. Those two have their scene. Then it's the Alan Arkin character and the Ed Harris character having their thing where they're sort of doing their back and forth about how the system's broken and they're never going to succeed. And then Harris sort of pitches the idea of like, what if we were to steal the leads? And then the last scene is the scene with Ricky Roma and the
Mark, whatever.
Mark,
yeah,
Link. Link. That's like the first act.
So just pause there. So to be clear, then what the movie does is intercuts all of those scenes.
Exactly.
Right. So that's smart. I mean, like that's a really smart move to.
I agree.
In terms of adaptation.
But having said that, reading the script of the play, I was like, 100% this works way better as a play.
So why is that?
I think it's the style of dialogue, the way that the narrative unfolds. There's just something very theatrical about it, which makes sense. David Mamet is a playwright.
Sure.
I mean, he eventually becomes a screenwriter and filmmaker, but much like Sorkin, who also started as a playwright, there's an energy and a rhythm to theatrical writing that is designed to be read live, playing off of an audience, playing off of live rhythms. It's why I'm not surprised that they had to do a long rehearsal period, because this dialogue requires you to sort of have it in your bones to be able to like play off of each other. And there's just something about it that as I was reading it, I was like, yeah, I can understand why this play was so highly lauded and why it won a Pulitzer and why they were like, oh, we got to adapt this to a movie. But it's that classic thing of like, I'm not entirely sure that a film adaptation could ever fully capture the energy of the play. Now, I've not seen the play, so I could be completely off base, but there was just something about even just reading it where I was like, yeah, there's something about this dialogue that feels very theatrical that is at odds with filmic dialogue.
Yeah, though that's fair. I'm going to make a counterpoint. So, did you notice anything kind of unusual in the camera work in this movie? Like, I mean, not the lighting and that kind of stuff, but the camera work itself, the movements in particular.
There was one moment that stood out to me. I think it's when Shelley's telling his story about how he like landed the
deal.
The deal.
Yeah.
And the camera is slowly pulling back from him.
Yep.
And that was a moment that I was like tuned into.
Totally.
That's the only thing that sort of comes to mind to me.
So I feel like there's some really interesting camera movement in this movie that is used to accentuate what's going on screen in a really clever way. And there's one move in particular that they use multiple times that I think is brilliant. It's basically a move where the camera shifts behind an actor's head and changes the 180 axis of the conversation.
Right.
So it's transgressing the 180 rule in a movement. So you don't notice it really
right.
as a
Yeah,
viewer.
yeah.
But what it's saying is the tables have turned in this conversation.
Right.
And so the moments where it happens are when Harris is talking to Arkin.
Yeah, that makes sense.
About stealing the leads, right? And he's like, yeah, no, it's a hypothetical conversation. And then Arkin goes on the offensive, and he's basically like, you're talking about stealing, blah, 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 right? And he starts going, so that's one of the moments. It goes behind Harris's head, and suddenly Arkin is sort of front and center, and he's driving the conversation. And it goes from behind their heads to in front of their faces.
Interesting.
So, that's a really cool moment. It happens again in the same conversation when Harris basically starts blackmailing Arkin.
Right.
And he's like, well, you have to do it because you're an accomplice, basically. You've listened to me, right? They do it again in that moment. And then it happens one more time. The camera goes behind Spacey's head when he realizes that Shelley knew he was home with his kids and he must have stolen the leads.
Right. Okay.
And I was like,
interesting.
That's actually brilliant. That's a really clever use of camera work to express the dynamic shift between characters on screen. And I feel like it is a move I've seen before, but I can't quite peg where. I think it might actually be in Better Call Saul. I think there might be similar moments there where Saul kind of turns on his persona, basically.
Right. There's something in my mind where I'm like, I can picture the move in my brain, but I can't peg what it's from. One of my favorite things does that. But all of this is to say that I think the second act of the film works so much better.
Right.
Despite being the most stagey part.
Right, but it's the more stagey part. I agree.
Ironically, it is the more stagey part, and maybe it has to do with the fact that you get to just watch Lemmon and Pacino do their thing.
Yeah.
And it's also enough of the plot machinations have been set up. Because I remember being like, okay, well, who is Pacino supposed to be? And who is Jonathan Pryce supposed to be? And then finally it's revealed, kind of in the last 5 or 10 minutes of the first act, who they are.
Right.
That was something that struck me as just I don't know if watching this, I would be like, oh, this is clearly based on a play. But once you know that, it feels like someone who's trying to open up a play rather than just accept the stagey nature of a play.
That's fair.
They're not leaning into it, in a way like 12 Angry Men or something would.
Right, where it's almost a bottle episode sort of situation.
Yeah.
Where it's we have one set and it's just all about the performances. I mean, I do think that it's interesting because it does do that in the second half. And I do think that it builds up to that in a really nice way. You're kind of getting these bits and pieces of the different characters and their situations and the plot. But then once you're in that room the next day, the pressure just builds for that entire last act. And it's unbearable at times. It's really you don't know exactly what's going to happen. There's awkward moments, angry moments. It's pretty great, that last half.
Yeah, I would agree.
So maybe that's a good segue to talk a little bit about the acting in this, and the characters.
I was just going to say, this feels like we should talk about the performances in this movie. Because they are what kind of carry the whole thing, in my opinion.
Absolutely. And I mean, nowhere better to start than Jack Lemmon, who is just incredible in this movie.
His performance is completely and utterly heartbreaking to the point where I found the ending of this movie pretty devastating.
Totally.
And depressing.
Totally.
And just was wow.
Yeah.
I was shocked to find out he didn't win an Academy Award for this.
Wasn't nominated.
Yeah.
That's crazy.
Especially because it's he's Jack Lemmon. He's
Yes.
You think it would be one of those if nothing else, we're giving it to you because you're Jack Lemmon and you've been doing this for so long.
Yes.
but you also kind of deserve it because your performance is so good. Yeah. And for him not to even be nominated is just like insane to me.
It is totally insane because I feel like this performance actually has so much going on too, where he's pathetic, he's angry and resentful, and sort of balancing all of that in a character and sometimes flashing back and forth between all of those different emotions is just so impressive. And like, there are many other good performances in this movie, but no one is being asked to do as much as Jack Lemmon in this.
I think it's Coppola talks about how, and interesting in reference to Al Pacino, in my favorite scene in The Godfather, the restaurant scene, where he talks about how, you know, Pacino is telling an entire story on his face without saying a single word of dialogue. And, you know, you're watching, and, you know, especially now in HD, it's much more noticeable. But you see, like, the way he clenches his jaw and the way, like, his lip sort of twitches. And that's sort of the classic thing that cinema can do that theater can't do. Theater doesn't have the close-up. Cinema and television, but, you know, filmed acting has the use of the close-up, and when employed properly can be so incredibly powerful and elevate something beyond in a way that theater can't do.
Right. You can really see what's going on in someone's head through the details on their face.
And I think that's where Lemmon really shines, is in that sort of after he's been found out and Roma is sort of like trying to bring him on as his man, and you just sort of see him become completely deflated, but also not wanting to give up the game. And you just watch his facial expressions, and it's just like he's saying so much without saying anything. And especially when you consider some of the other performances in this movie, which are very large and broad.
Totally.
I think that is just incredible.
Yeah.
It's such an incredible performance.
Totally. I think my favorite scene with him is the back and forth between him and Spacey near the beginning of the movie when he's begging for the leads and trying to cut a deal. And he keeps flashing back and forth between trying to ingratiate himself with Spacey and then being really pissed off at how unfair the situation is. And there's like I think there's a moment in particular where he like starts saying something angrily and then kind of it turns into a laugh.
Don't jump. Hey, don't jump out of your manager bag a second. It's just two guys talking, am I right?
It's just amazing. Just amazing. A total joy to watch. And as much as I do love Gil, it's kind of wild that this performance gets flattened into the Gil character, because it's like, that's kind of like one aspect of this performance. Yeah. Like the scene where he does sit down with the therapist from Matchstick Men. That's the scene that makes me think of Gil the most.
Totally.
Is like, because he's really trying to make the sale, and it's really pathetic, and like, he tries to talk his way into picking up this man's wife with him and then coming to a family gathering.
Let's take my car, huh? We'll pick her up together. Spoke to the little woman on the phone. Can't wait to meet her.
No, we're going over to our relatives.
Oh, she didn't say anything.
Like, it's totally outrageous. And he's sort of like making comments about like a teddy bear he finds on the couch. Like, it's just totally ridiculous and pathetic. But like the rest of this, there's so much nuance going on.
Yeah. It's easily the best thing in the movie.
Yeah. Well, now, how about a performance that was nominated for an Academy Award? Al Pacino as Ricky Roma.
Yeah. Pacino.
Gets top billing in this movie, too.
He sure does. Well, I mean, I guess understandably.
I mean, given like star power at the time. Because like Jack Lemmon is, you know, has a long, long career, but Pacino is still hotter at this point.
Yeah. And I don't know that Jack Lemmon was ever a leading man in the way, like, he had leading roles, but I still sort of think he's kind of seen as like a character actor and a comedian or a comedic actor. Like not a serious dramatic actor like Al Pacino was seen. So it makes sense that Pacino gets top billing. Yeah, well, I sort of posited to you that I think this might be Pacino's last truly good performance, or at least the last performance before he goes full Pacino.
Yeah, as we know him today.
There are flashes of Hooah Pacino in this.
There totally are. The part where he gets angry at the end, and he's like, I'm going downtown.
Oh, I'm going to have your job, shithead. I'm going downtown. I'm going to talk to Mitch and Murray. I'm going to Lemkin.
Yeah, but he's not quite there yet.
Right.
And so I did some research and I was like, okay, well, where does this land? Because I was like, is that true? Is that accurate? Is this the last good Pacino performance? So the same year this movie comes out is when Scent of a Woman comes out.
Hooah!
And so wait, was he double nominated? Or maybe supporting and lead?
Maybe, or maybe because of when the films were released, it fell into different Oscar seasons. I don't know.
Yeah, so in 1993, he wins for actor in a leading role, and he is nominated for actor in a supporting role.
Wow, so he was double nominated.
Crazy.
That is crazy.
For two roles that I don't think he deserves it for at all.
I mean, of the two, this is the more deserving performance.
Sure, but like low bar. I mean, I don't...
Well, fair.
That movie.
But that's what I'm saying. Okay, so same year, double nominated. The other performance is Scent of a Woman, where he completely, like, I think it's safe to say that is the beginning of crazy Al Pacino.
Yes.
Yabba dabba doo.
Heat is 95, so 3 years later.
Yep.
And again, very highly regarded performance, but he does go full Pacino with your favorite moment in, I think, all of cinema history.
Because she got a great ass.
Yeah.
Yeah.
97 is Donnie Brasco, which is very big and brought in, and The Devil's Advocate. Have you ever seen The Devil's Advocate?
I have not.
He is wild in that movie.
I found a new Simpsons reference to The Devil's Advocate recently in a...
Okay, well, we're not covering that movie because that movie sucks. It's so bad. And then 99 is The Insider, which I watched again this past year. I always really liked it. I feel like, again, it's a relatively subdued Pacino performance, but still has moments where he goes full Pacino.
Right.
And then 2002 is Insomnia, which is another movie that I love, but like he's
doing his thing.
He's chewing the scenery. He can't sleep. He just wants to sleep. So yeah, I genuinely think this might be the last truly good, normal Pacino performance.
Yeah, I mean, I do think that like Scent of a
I
Woman
think
broke
he's good
him.
in this. Scent of a Woman absolutely broke him.
I do think that he is pretty good in this. I can't believe that he got the nomination over Jack Lemmon, though. That's absolutely
that's
insane.
Yeah, that's insane to me.
Though this role doesn't have enough to it that it makes sense to me that he was nominated over Jack Lemmon. He's not asked to do that much in this.
No, but he has to be the smarmy, suave salesman who can sell anybody.
Sure.
I do genuinely think his performance is excellent, and he captures the energy of that guy.
Yeah.
In a way that would be very difficult for a certain type of performer.
Right. Because you have to, as the audience, both see the sleaziness, but also buy that he would be able to convince Link to make the sale, right? And that he
you have to see the sleaziness, but
Mark.
like him.
And also, yeah, like him enough that you are kind of rooting for him and Lemmon to kind of like make it, you know?
Yeah. To team up and become partners and take over the company and take down the like shitty boss and managers.
Right. And that moment that also stuck out to me with the camera pulling back, and you just see the two of them sitting together at the desk, and Roma is genuinely asking to hear the story of Shelley's sale. That is probably the sweetest, most intimate moment between two men in this movie.
Well, and I love the two-hander of once Jonathan Pryce shows up.
Yeah. Oh my God.
Immediately he's like, play along. And that whole sequence where
So
he's
good.
sort of like, where Lemon's pretending like he has to go, and like he doesn't miss a beat. Like they're basically conning this guy. Like that. And then he's like, look at my day book. I gotta be in LA. Like it's like, I loved that section.
Oh,
like,
so good.
It's so good. So that's what I mean. Like
It's true. Yeah.
I do think he's very good, and I was trying to rack my brain of like who else could play this role, and it's so funny when you think of like, again, you're pitching De Niro and Willis. It's like, okay, well,
yeah, which one of them is playing that role?
Like both of them wouldn't be able to pull it off, really.
Bruce Willis, I kind of see it from Bruce Willis actually, in the sense that he
maybe
I don't think of him as suave, but he can do that balance of like you're charming, but you're kind of a macho prick. sort of thing.
Yeah. I guess it's just because I don't like Bruce Willis.
I know. I'm not huge on Bruce Willis either. I could kind of see the thinking, but I don't think it's quite the same vibe. Maybe it's just a different direction for that role. But like, I could see him both making the sale and then also getting worked up and angry and also being kind of likable. Like, you know, I think he could probably hit that maybe. But De Niro is not the Jack Lemmon character.
No.
So
not at all. All that is to say, I do think Pacino is doing a very good job with what he's given.
Mm-hmm.
And what's so interesting is that there was a recent Broadway revival of the play, and Pacino played Shelley.
Right. I saw that.
And was like, critics sort of like completely lambasted. Like said
really?
He was not right at all in the role.
Yeah, it seems hard to buy. I mean, the sort of like nervousness and likability is so part of Jack Lemmon's persona as a star.
Exactly.
That like it's so hard to imagine a better person in that role. And I just don't think that Pacino has that energy, you know?
No. In a weird way, like he's almost too charming, but like I could see maybe in 10 years Tom Hanks pulling that off.
Yeah, I mean, he can do bumbling a little
Right?
bit, I think.
You know, like he's maybe a little too America's Dad that like he could never be that pathetic
In
a
10
character.
years?
but-
How old is he going to be in 10 years, Adam?
Like in his 70s.
Really?
Wouldn't
Is he that young? He's 68, so he'd be 78.
Yeah, but that's what I mean. Like, he still looks young. Like, he has to be the sort of lovable character that you're rooting for, and Pacino's not that.
No,
Like,
no, he's
so it's
Michael
very-
Corleone, and I mean, he's like,
exactly.
You know,
it's
like,
very weird.
He's much better at playing the unlikable protagonist. Who you're sort of skeptical of or suspicious of, like
which
he's
Roma
great at
is.
that.
Like that's why I think it is actually really, really brilliant casting.
It's good casting. I would agree with that. So I do have one alternative casting for you, which is also a Simpsons connection.
Okay.
So do you know who played Ricky Roma in the original Broadway cast?
I'm gonna make a guess just because I know he's a Mamet guy.
Okay.
Is it Fat Tony?
It sure is Joe Montana. Could definitely see him in this role.
Totally, you could see him as that.
Yeah.
Especially if you've seen him in the other Mamet stuff, like he's in House of Games.
Oh, okay.
And he totally plays the like sleazeball characters like really, really well.
Yeah.
I think that's partly like why they cast him as Fat Tony. Like he's
totally
he completely encapsulates that kind of character.
Yeah, would love to see it. All right, Alec Baldwin as Blake.
Yeah.
Really? Not into it?
Like I think his performance is fine.
I
just like that was maybe the most insufferable part of the movie. It's the Fight Club thing. It's like this is the moment of the movie that all the dude bros cite and love and not realize that this is the satirical part of the movie that you shouldn't be rooting for this guy.
Right.
You don't want to be this guy. This is the bad guy.
He's the embodiment of the rigged game.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So I think Baldwin's very good at it. It's also colored by the fact that like it's hard to watch Baldwin play a straight role like that after doing 30 Rock for 8 years or whatever.
Yeah.
But he definitely has the right energy. The brash, macho, tough guy, takes no shits. Like, I think the performance is very good. I just found that entire sequence insufferable.
Yeah.
Which is probably the point. I think I'm taking it the way that you're supposed to take it.
Yeah.
At least that's my hope.
I think
what
so.
about you?
Yeah, I definitely think that's how you're supposed to take it. Like you said, they added it to do two things, like clarify some exposition and then raise the stakes. Like, okay, they're going to get fired if they don't pull this off. So the stakes are really high. It's very clear what the goal is for these salesmen. It's not just like, you know, they're just trying to get by. And I feel like that does tighten up the story a fair amount in movie form. You know, we already mentioned it, but this is basically Full Metal Jacket. This is like exactly the same sequence.
Totally.
Of just like
I didn't think about that, but you're right.
He is the drill instructor. He's breaking them down. He's calling them all sorts of slurs, like all of it, right? It's very similar. Apparently, Baldwin says he actually modeled it after Patton.
Okay,
So
that
similar,
makes sense.
similar vibe, but I actually think it has more in common with Full Metal Jacket, just in terms of both the tone and the satire, right? Just like that movie is all about turning people into weapons, and maybe it's necessary for war to work, but like is that really what we want? This is similarly being like, well, to win the game, this is how you got to do it. But then it's sort of like, but is the game just like a mess? Is this really how it should work? Like, that's the question it's trying to raise. Yeah, so Baldwin's character is successful, but like, he's successful because he's successful. It's like, he got successful and now he gets all the good leads and now he makes $900,000 a year, right? Like, that's his character. I mean, I think it's a great addition. It's a very economical, fun way to do all the things that they needed to add to the movie, right? Totally. If you're going to have a bunch of new exposition and you're going to try to raise the stakes at the same time, this is like a great way to do it. Alec Baldwin really pulls it off. Again, like, who else is doing that role, you know?
Yeah, totally.
At that moment in time, you could have like Michael Douglas, but he's too old. You know, he's the owner of the business. He's not the like young hot shot who's doing really well. So like, Alec Baldwin's just at a perfect place for this, I think.
Totally.
Okay. Alan Arkin, who isn't even mentioned on the DVD box or the VHS box. I mean, rude, but also he is kind of underutilized in this. I
that would be my biggest complaint, is just like, he's not in it enough.
No, he doesn't get enough to do.
He's such a great actor, and like, whenever he shows up in something, I'm always like, yes,
yeah.
Like, he elevates everything he's in. But I would agree, like, there's just not enough of him, and I don't think it really plays to his strengths. It's funny, the whole time in my mind when I think back to it, the actor that I sort of see in that role is Mark Rylance.
Oh.
He's kind of there to play to Ed Harris, which maybe this is a good segue to Ed Harris.
Yeah.
Probably my least favorite performance in the film.
I agree. I mean, I think
he's in a different movie.
Yeah. It's just kind of at one pitch the whole time. He's just angry. He's really angry for the whole movie.
Kind of Ed Harris's thing, maybe.
Yeah.
I don't know. Like, I don't. Again, maybe it's a generational thing, but like, he feels like the quintessential like macho, older, masculine male actor that, you know. I mean, he's perfect in the new Top Gun movie, playing the like disgruntled general, because like he feels like he's been playing that role for 40 years. Like, you know, he's good in The Abyss, but again, it's just like he plays like these hardened, like working class, you know, dicks. And as you said, he basically bullies Alan Arkin's character and blackmails him into something.
Or he tries, but
he tries to.
I think Alan Arkin's the snitch, pretty much.
Yeah, but I would say his performance is definitely my least favorite, because it is sort of, one note's maybe a little unfair, but it's
very like, there's like a volume dial. You know, it's just kind of like higher or lower. Again, it's not really fair, but when you compare it to Lemmon, it's like he's not just higher or lower. He's got completely different threads going on that are all interweaving in these interesting ways. And I don't think Harris's performance is that complex, I guess.
And again, he's achieving what he needs to achieve. But again, it feels like he's in a different movie, or like a different league from the rest of the cast.
So what I will say is, I think this is where that intercutting is really playing to the movie's advantage. Because
definitely,
if we just had all of their dialogue consolidated in one long scene, oh my God, it would be tedious, right? You wouldn't get through it. Whereas it's kind of like broken up and in different locations and interwoven with all of this great stuff from Lemmon and Spacey. You know, I will say, I think Spacey is actually pretty good in this.
I mean, Spacey has a type. That's for darn sure.
Yeah, exactly. It's like, he's very good at these kinds of roles. I wonder why that is.
Well, okay. So again, context. Watching this, you can't help but feel the Spacey of it all.
Yes.
Prior to what we discovered about Kevin Spacey, I remember thinking he was a good actor. But then, like, in the subsequent years of watching performances of Kevin Spacey, I'm like, was he a good actor or not? Like, I kind of don't know. Obviously, he's great in Seven. Spoiler alert. I watched The Negotiator this past year. Have you ever seen The Negotiator?
I don't think
it's like a classic, like, 90s blockbuster, F. Gary Gray. It's really fun, and he is really good in it.
Yeah.
When he kind of plays these, like, dickhead asshole roles, like, he feels very one note, and just, like, it's weird to me that, like, someone would watch a movie like this and be like, we're gonna make that guy a star.
Well, I wouldn't say that this role is one note. I think that he has a particular character type he plays again and again. But I think that part of why he is good is that he adds a fair amount of nuance to that character. He plays both like, you know, smug, dickish boss type character, but he also plays wounded dog. Like when Shelley comes after him in the second act and like calls him an idiot, and Roma calls him an idiot and really dresses him down. Like he's playing that in a way that does feel quite sympathetic. And then he turns around and delivers the same kind of resentment that Jack Lemmon is delivering.
Yeah.
Right. And so like, I feel like he goes on quite a journey in this movie, but this character type is exactly his wheelhouse. This is the role that you see him come back to again and again and again and again and again. And when he tries to do other things, like, you know, maybe one day we'll cover American Beauty on this podcast because it is parodied, believe it or not, albeit briefly. Number one, I don't think that movie just holds up at all, but like, he is not a great leading man, you know, not that I need him to be likable and like generic, but just like, I don't know if he's that sympathetic, you know?
I remembered the other movie that I watched recently that he's in that this feels like he's just doing the same thing again. And it's LA Confidential.
Sure. Right. Exactly.
Like there's this smugness and this cocksure nature to the character where again, like that whole movie, I was just like, I can't see past the Kevin Spacey-ness of it all. And that's how I felt in this. Like I really just, and again, maybe that's unfair. Like maybe in 1992, you don't have that association. That being said, when I watched The Negotiator, I believe my Letterboxd review was like, I know it's Kevin Spacey, but I kind of can't deny he's like hella charming in this movie. And he's playing opposite Samuel L. Jackson. It's two like powerhouse actors pulling their weight. So,
well, and the crazy thing is like, I was looking at his filmography before this, and it's like, this is kind of a breakout role of sorts for him. I think before that, you know, he was doing like romantic comedies and TV series.
Yeah.
Which is like a completely different, you know, sort of tone. Like he's in Working Girl.
Looking at the posters for all the movies that came before this, he's not on the posters.
Right.
Whereas this is the movie where he is on the poster.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. And he's also acting opposite legends. So like this does feel like an important role for him. And it very much sets the tone for what he'd become best known for.
I mean, I think Usual Suspects is probably still the definitive breakout role for him.
Yeah.
But yeah, this definitely gives him some juice.
That's kind of another one of those roles where he's kind of, it's actually interesting. I hadn't thought of this before, but Philip Seymour Hoffman used to play roles like this too.
Mm-hmm.
And then he discovered the other side of his persona, which is the sort of like pathetic schlub who is
the
like
happiness,
who like no one likes, but is kind of sympathetic to the audience. Like he was so good at finding the sympathy in those unlikable characters. Even like Twister, he plays that role. And actually, Kevin Spacey's kind of doing that in The Usual Suspects. He does both sides of it. Anyway, we gave him too much time. Jonathan Pryce, good old Jonathan Pryce. I love him.
Like, talk about kind of underused in the sense that like he has very little dialogue in the movie, but like he's such a key plot point of the movie, and he's seen a lot.
Yeah,
he's great.
He's always great.
You know, he's always great.
Yeah, and when he does come back, like he doesn't
so good.
He doesn't have a lot of words said, but he's such a presence and adds this sense of like uncertainty to that scene. It's part of the rising tension of that whole second act.
Totally.
Where he shows up and you're like, oh shit. And you immediately kind of know what's going to happen, but then it really like goes downhill. And I think it's the moment right before he leaves where he apologizes to Roma.
Forgive me.
And he just delivers it so perfectly that you really buy that this guy, like, he is a mark. He's just such a rube that he really believes that, like, Roma is his friend and that he's personally disappointed him by not taking this deal. And the only reason he's doing it is because his wife has, like, more sense than he does.
Yeah.
Yeah. Pretty amazing.
Yeah, he's so good in this.
Yeah.
It's the opposite of the Alan Arkin thing of, like, he may not have a ton of dialogue, but, like, every line he has and every moment he has is so impactful that you're sort of just like, okay, I understand why Jonathan Pryce is on the poster.
Yeah, and that speaks to casting too, right? Of just like they are playing off of his sort of persona, so that when he comes in, you have, you know, the baggage of Brazil and other movies like that where he's playing this kind of character.
He's phenomenal.
Okay, and lastly, Bruce Altman as Mr. Spannel, the guy who Shelley is trying to sell to, and as I've said many times now, the therapist from Matchstick Men. What do we
I
think?
love that you keep coming back to him.
That's
I mean, he's one of those classic character actors that, again, when he came on screen, I'm like, damn it, what do I know him from? And I had to like go through the IMDb list. Interestingly enough, shows up again in James Foley's 50 Shades Darker and 50 Shades Freed. So like, I don't know if he's like a James Foley guy.
Interesting.
But yeah, no, like he's that pitch perfect. We've all been there where someone is trying to sell you and you're trying to be polite at first and just like playing along, but also trying to move things along. And then he gets to the point where he finally is like, no, like, just get the out. Like, we're not doing this anymore.
You're not coming to our family gathering.
Yeah. And he's the perfect actor to do that because you totally buy that. At first he's being polite and then he's sort of getting impatient. And then finally he's just like, no, like, we're done. We're done here.
Yeah. Yeah.
He's great. He's so good.
Yeah. Again, small role, but like perfectly cast, perfectly executed for what it is. Yeah. It is a good cast overall. For sure. But I feel like this really was sold as this kind of superhero team up of actors. Do you feel like it lives up to that reputation?
I will say, in the opening credits, when it was listing name after name after name, and I knew that a bunch of these, I don't think I realized Ed Harris or Alan Arkin were in this movie.
Yeah, no, me neither.
So I was just like, God damn, like,
yeah,
who isn't in this movie?
Women.
Well, no, fair enough. But yeah, it's this interesting thing of like, okay, you've got some of the greatest working actors of that era, but as we've sort of discussed, like, not all of them are given enough to do, but at the same time, those that are make such a meal of what they're given that, like, yeah, I don't know, it's kind of weird. It's in a way, it's kind of like the Avengers.
Yeah.
Like, that you have these powerhouses and some of them are being underutilized. Like, I always feel like, I'm like, really? We're getting Mark Ruffalo to play the Hulk? Like,
really? Oh, man, I love Mark Ruffalo.
No, I love, that's what I'm saying. Like, I love him, and I feel like he doesn't have he never gets enough screen time because, like, we're spending all our time with Robert Downey Jr. Again, I've only seen that movie, like, once.
I actually think he's well deployed.
Okay, well, fair enough.
They sort of realized that the Hulk isn't maybe a great character to center a movie on.
No,
but
of course not.
He's great in like these small doses, and Mark Ruffalo plays it so he finds the humor in the role so well, I think.
But like, no disrespect to Chris Evans, but like, if I have the option of watching a movie that is predominantly Chris Evans or predominantly Mark Ruffalo, I'm probably going to pick Mark Ruffalo. So it's just like, it's one of those things. Similarly, like, you've got Alan Arkin in your movie, and you know he doesn't get to do as much. So it's like. Yeah,
yes, but you don't have Chris Evans in the lead. You have Al Pacino and Jack Lemmon. Just saying.
And they fucking rule, Nate. Like, they're so good.
Yes.
So, yeah, I don't know. It is an interesting balance, and obviously they can't all have the same amount of runtime.
Right, but it's like, in an ideal world, they'd all get the Alec Baldwin treatment of it's like a short but powerful moment, I guess. Jonathan Pryce gets that in this movie, too. I kind of feel like Bruce Altman gets that. It's not a big and flashy role, but he gets his moment to do it.
Let's call a spade a spade. Apart from the exposition, you could cut Harris and Arkin and lose nothing. Their roles are functionally as exposition to set up this idea of someone's going to steal the leads, and that opens up the whodunit of Act 2.
It's it's the red herring. You need enough characters that you can plausibly think it might be someone else other than Shelley.
And I mean, Harris's other position is to yell at Baldwin in his monologue, but that scene isn't in the play. So like, when you really think about their function in the story,
it's plot.
It's plot. It's to set up this, who is it going to be?
Yeah.
Because if you don't have them, and it was just Roma and Jack Lemmon, you'd immediately be like, well, clearly of those two, I don't think it's Roma who stole
doing
money.
okay.
But like, okay, so that's an interesting question. At any point, did you expect that Shelley, up until he slips up and reveals that he stole them, did you think that it was him?
I don't think so. And I think it's partly because I also was taken aback by the fact that this was a whodunit, right? I thought this was just a straight drama. And so the idea that someone was going to steal it, I was kind of like, oh, okay, well, like, you know, because it's just the two of them. They're talking about stealing it. And then you get to the second half and someone is broken in. And so my initial reaction was just sort of like, oh, okay, so they went through with it. Right?
Yeah, I was like,
and
it's
then
gotta
it
be,
kind of builds
it's
from
gonna be
there.
one of
and
them,
you're like, maybe it
or
isn't them. Yeah.
I was like, maybe Spacey, because he's Spacey.
Sure.
Maybe he stole them and sold them. He has all the means and he staged the break-in or something. But like, I never for a second assumed that it was going to be Jack Lemmon, especially because he's flying high on he makes this sale. That's part of the plot, is that you're like, wow, he's so happy he doesn't need to.
Right.
And then, of course, that horrible revelation that, no, you didn't actually make a sale. Yeah. Which is just devastating. That
so
line
brutal.
of like, why did you do it? Because I don't like you. Like, it's just...
Well, I mean, he was like, just 2 minutes ago, like shitting all over him.
Well, fair enough.
And,
but...
you know, and basically being like, you, that's my message. Kiss my ass. Like, you know, it's pretty easy to not like someone in that situation. But
yeah, but he's saying it to Kevin Spacey, who I'm like, well, he probably deserves
I mean,
this.
the character definitely does deserve it, but that doesn't mean he has to like him for it.
Fair. But I think the implication is that he hasn't liked him for some time.
Yeah.
And I think based on what I read of the play and what I was reading about the play, there is more about the fact that Williamson sort of has this animosity towards Shelley because Shelley has been rude and abusive to him for an extended period of time.
Right.
Where I feel like that doesn't quite come across in the film.
Yeah. I mean, I think what does come across, though, is that, like, Shelley has these sort of two modes. It's
Definitely.
like, when he's not on a streak, he's this, like, pathetic, bumbling, desperate character. And then when he is on a streak, he's like insufferable and resentful and mean and gloating. But they are really two sides of the same coin because they're all about his insecurity, right?
Yeah,
and
definitely.
And so when he starts becoming that gloating mess, I did get the feeling like this is part of his personality. Like he's definitely done this before.
Definitely.
But yeah, I definitely did not see it coming. Definitely a testament to the writing. And it ends up being almost like a reverse Usual Suspects, where it's like the Usual Suspects, it's like this trusted character like did it and then they get away with it scot-free. And like that's the payoff. In this, it's like, oh my God, like the last 10 minutes of this movie, you just watch it all come crumbling down.
Well, so that was going to bring me to my sort of like final question to sort of like, I think, wrap things up is like, what was your take on the ending? Because again, tying it back to this idea of the play, this to me feels like a very theatrical ending, not in the sort of like broad sense, but in the sense of like, I feel like it's not uncommon for a play to end on a smaller note or end on a cliffhanger's maybe not the right word, but to end this way, things aren't necessarily resolved. Whereas I feel like there's a tendency in cinema that an ending needs to be like definitive. Everything, you know, as Homer says, everything wrapped up in a neat little package.
Right.
Like there's a more definitive ending, or we would see the aftermath of like the fallout of Shelley's actions, and you know he's sentenced and what happens to his daughter, and like there's a lot of threads that are kind of left hanging in the air. In fact, we don't see him interrogated by the police.
Right.
We don't see his confession, assuming he does confess. So that's what I mean by like it feels theatrical.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I think the ending's brilliant. Shelley gets caught, and you know you don't have to see all those things because you can kind of imagine it pretty quickly. Kevin Spacey's character has basically figured it out, and he's going to tell the cops. So he's being taken into the interrogation room, which you know is the beginning of the end. You know what that's going to mean for his daughter, right?
You know he's not enough of a con man to be able to talk his way out of this.
Right, exactly. So it's like you can imagine all of that. What it really tells you is just like two things. Number one, there is no real way to get ahead in this game. It is rigged. And if you try to break the rules, like you're just going to get caught. but the rules aren't fair either. So it's sort of like you're just damned if you do, damned if you don't. And then
Okay, but if Roma had stolen the leads, do you think he would have gotten away with it? Because I think that's part of it, is that like Shelley slips up, right? Because he's not enough of a con man.
But see, that's exactly right. Is that it's like the people who are good at the game can also cheat at the game.
Right.
So it's like
fair
it's
enough.
just the whole movie is about this sort of compounding interest of success, right?
Yeah.
The more you have, the more you make. And the other big takeaway, I think, is that it doesn't end with him going into the interrogation room, which would have been a totally fair ending. But you have this little tag at the end of Arkin and Pacino having a quick back and forth where Arkin kind of comes back and he's like, did they catch who did it? And, you know, basically what happens is Pacino's like, all right, I'm going back to the restaurant. See ya. And then Arkin's like, yeah, okay. And then he gets on the phone and starts calling again. And so it's this sort of feeling of like, not only did this big thing happen and Shelley's totally screwed, but life just goes on. The game keeps going, and these other characters are going to keep playing the game. You know, whether you're Roma, who's successful and great at the game, or you're George, right, who is just like barely scraping by. He might get those steak knives if he's lucky, right? But he's going to keep playing the game, and he's going to keep playing by the rules, right? Because he did snitch. It's very on message and very within the characters. And I think for that reason, it really works. And then you do get one of the other sort of cinematic things throughout this is the motif of the train passing by, right? Which is used in the opening credits. It's used as the act break. And then it comes back at the very end here, right before the credits. So it's just kind of like really just a visual motif to tie it together. I don't really know if it has any symbolic significance or not.
Yeah.
Maybe your opportunities passing you by. I don't know.
Yeah. Well, that brings us to the parts that seem like Simpson jokes, but aren't. I'm not going to lie to you. I don't think I wrote anything down in my notes because, like, there is humor and levity in this movie, but not... Oh, actually, no, that's not true. There is a moment where a guy knocks on a window and it did have, like, an energy of, can I come too?
When is that?
I don't know. I just it's written in my notes.
Is that one of your like all-time favorite gags on The Simpsons?
100% it is one of my all-time.
I feel like it comes
I don't
up
know
a lot.
why. Like it's just it's
Can I
the
come too?
it's just it's. I mean that and an electric nostril groomer,
right?
No, it is. It's because it's such a simple gag.
Yeah,
and it's beautifully timed. The sound design is so good.
Yes.
The way they like mute the O because the window's up. Like,
right.
It is a masterful moment on that show, and I will never stop singing its praises. So yes, I think it is probably one of my top. That and like Sideshow Bob stepping on rakes. Like those are the two greatest moments in the history of The Simpsons.
All right, I do have a part that seems like a Simpsons joke but isn't. Well, here's my take. I think Ricky Roma has a real Hank Scorpio energy.
Oh,
he's got a kind of like Al Brooks riffing sort of vibe to it when he's like monologuing about just all sorts of bullshit.
They took the phones.
Yeah, where he's like, you know, talking about like, you know, like life passing you by and you have to like, you know, take what you want and blah, blah, blah. And then at one point he just like is about to get up and he goes, you ever take a dump that made you feel like you slept 12 hours? And I was like,
write that line down.
That feels like that could be a Hank Scorpio line.
You ever seen a man throw his shoes?
Yeah, exactly. So that was the only thing that jumped out at me.
Totally. So Nate, how did this movie do performance-wise? I mean, we know the play won a Pulitzer, and we know that Mr. Pacino was nominated for an Academy Award, but how did it do at the box office?
It did not make back its budget.
Oh, wow. Okay, I didn't know that.
Yeah, which is kind of crazy. It's like super well remembered, critically acclaimed.
But I mean, I guess that makes it that is the definition of a cult classic. Like you think about,
but I wouldn't even call this a cult classic. Like people don't treat this like a cult classic. People kind of treat this like, oh yeah, that's a great movie.
Well, it's sort of it kind of feels one in a piece with like Shawshank, like a movie. I mean, a classic male movie, but like, you know, that movie famously bombed at the theater and then through word of mouth and home video becomes a phenomenon.
Yeah,
So
I didn't find as much about this on home video or on like TV, but I could totally see this being something that just like had this incredibly long afterlife. The other interesting thing is sort of like where this sits in the top movies of the year. So top 5, we have Batman Returns in number 1.
oh right, yeah, 92.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yep. Weird number 1. Like in retrospect, it's wild that movie was number 1, given its reputation even at the time among audiences.
Yeah, but I mean, everybody saw that movie.
Yeah, yeah. But it's like it's weird that it didn't kind of like, you know, have a big opening weekend and then drop off or something because people were like,
Right.
wow, that movie's really kinky and I don't want my kids watching it, right? Or whatever. Anyway, Lethal Weapon 3.
Okay.
Sure. I don't think I've seen Lethal Weapon 3. Sister Act.
Okay.
It's a fun movie. Home Alone 2, Lost in New York.
Right, of course.
And Wayne's World.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. So like 3 comedies.
3 comedies. And
One
Lethal Weapon
action
3.
comedy. Yeah.
Kind of an action comedy. And then Batman Returns.
And Batman Returns.
This movie does not crack the top 100.
Really? Well, I guess if it doesn't make it, it's $12.5 million budget back.
Yeah.
Then yeah.
Yeah, exactly. It comes in at 101 behind a movie called Stay Tuned, directed by Peter Hyams.
Okay.
This is the description of this movie. A husband and wife are sucked into a hellish television set and must survive the gauntlet of twisted versions of shows in which they find themselves. Which actually sounds very similar to the plot of one of the segments in Twilight Zone, the movie, which we'll be covering soon.
Sounds like a Twilight Zone pitch.
So yeah, this is behind that movie, a movie I have never, ever heard of.
No.
And it's right ahead of Hoffa, which is the biopic of Hoffa, directed by Danny DeVito. Did not know that.
Yeah.
Starring Jack Nicholson and DeVito, and it's also written by David Mamet.
Oh, right.
So it's Mamet on Mamet.
Well, I will say, sorry to interject, but I'm just thinking the budget was $12.5 million. We know $1 million of that went to Mamet.
Yeah.
So that leaves you with $11.5 million.
Wow.
And you've got Jack Lemmon, Ed Harris, Al Pacino.
Yep.
Like, I have to imagine most of that money went to Pacino.
I think several of them did take kind of pay cuts.
Oh, they would have had
to do it because, you know, it was Mamet and it was like this sort of opportunity to do like quote unquote real acting. So I think that that's part of how they managed to pull it off. But yeah, crazy. So the Academy Awards, as we talked about, there wasn't a lot, but Pacino was nominated for supporting actor. And there was actually some controversy around this because apparently in their sort of for your consideration packet, they claimed that the entire cast unanimously decided that Jack Lemmon should be nominated from this movie.
Okay.
This was a total bullshit, and the studio just made it up, it seems like. And Ed Harris retroactively was like, no, I definitely, he's like, I like Jack's performance, but hey, you know, like... So, yeah, I thought that was kind of interesting. But yeah, it's no wins, which is great. Again, given the reputation of this movie and sort of like what it seemed to be trying to do, which is like bring together a bunch of heavy-hitting actors to do a serious drama, I feel like that's a real loss to not have more nominations from this. You know, that seems like kind of the point, you know?
Yeah. Yeah. I'm looking up. I want to see what else was like nominated that year. Okay, so it was the My Cousin Vinny and Unforgiven year.
Wow, what a weird set of movies.
Yeah, I'm looking through. Oh, Bram Stoker's Dracula.
Oh, there you go.
Interesting. Okay. Unforgiven. It seems like Unforgiven did Howard's End. Best original song to Tim Rice and Alan Menken for something from Disney. Yeah. Okay. Interesting. Interesting year. Yeah. But yeah, you're right. It's weird that this is not more present.
Yeah. Yeah. Again, just doesn't. I don't think it speaks well to the goals of the movie in some ways.
Yeah,
like
for sure.
being successful on its own terms, I guess. And on that note, I guess, what do you think, Adam? Do the strengths outweigh the weaknesses in the end for this one?
Yeah, I mean, I will say, coming off of it, I was like, well, this is the most depressing movie we've ever watched for this show, and we watched Full Metal Jacket.
Yeah.
I liked this more than Full Metal Jacket, though. But it's also one of the... Like, it's interesting to me that this is one of those movies that has, like, become so quoted, and as we sort of alluded to, so popular amongst a certain generation of men. Because I have no desire to watch this movie again.
No.
Like, I found this movie pretty devastating.
Yeah.
Surprisingly entertaining, I would say, as well. Like, I was entertained in the end because of that sort of second act of the film, or second act of the play. Anyway.
Yeah.
And by no means is it a badly made film. So, yeah, I think the strengths outweigh the weaknesses. I think it's worth people seeing. But I don't know that you need to rush to see it. And once you have, I don't feel like it's something that you're going to throw on every year.
Yeah.
What about you?
Yeah, I think that's about right. I think you should see it just for Jack Lemmon's performance.
Yeah,
it's like,
exactly.
It's just an incredible piece of acting. If you care at all about that kind of thing, like it's just, you have to see it. It's a really stunning performance.
And I would argue to see, as I said, the last great Pacino performance before he completely goes off the rails.
Yes.
So
yeah, totally. So I feel like that would be the reason to see this, and a script that enables him to do that. So that would be my big pitch for it. Like I said, I do think there are some interesting little, like, sort of filmmaking moments to it, but you're right, it is very stagey overall. But I do think this kind of pulls it off just because of the caliber of the acting for the most part, and the script really carries you along, especially, as you said, once you get into that second half where the plot's really taking off. Like, it's hard to turn away. Like, I was preparing for this, I was just rewatching a few scenes, and I was like, oh, I should really rewatch the part where Link comes back, and just like that back and forth. And I just ended up watching like the latter half of the movie, basically.
Right.
Because it just keeps going, and the tension is so hard to turn away from. So, like, I think it really does have some great stuff going on. It's not, but I agree, it's probably not something you're going to come back to again and again. Maybe unless you're in sales. I don't know. And
yeah,
you're like,
maybe.
Always be closing, baby. But, like, for me, I agree. It's kind of an unpleasant watch, but also quite engaging as well.
What about, a companion or extra credit viewing? What would you pair this movie with?
Yeah. I think my challenge here is that, like, I thought of a bunch of movies, but I'm not sure if I would recommend all of these movies.
Okay.
Or like, I have to really be in the right mood for them. And they all are these really bro-y movies that, usually when someone tells you to watch them, they're telling you to watch them for the wrong reasons. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So the one that's like the most obvious parallel is probably The Wolf of Wall Street. But, because of the content of, like, it's all about this sort of like slimy salesmanship and all of that. It is, the thing that's weird about that one is that actually sort of a morality movie in the same way that this is, or is it actually kind of glorifying it a little bit more?
Yeah.
And I feel like it's a little blurrier there.
I would agree.
Again, like, Scorsese goes back and forth in his filmmaking on this. Like, I feel like Goodfellas is very clear cut in some ways, and he flirts with the glamour of the mob very effectively in the first half, but then it really falls apart in the second half, and you're kind of like, okay, I was seduced by this just like the character was.
Yeah.
Wolf of Wall Street doesn't ever really let up on the seduction.
No,
and
so much.
And so I'm kind of torn about recommending it, but it does feel like an obvious companion. But yeah, and I have other ideas, but I'm curious to hear if you have one.
Well, see, I didn't go in that direction. I kind of went. I was really struggling to come up with what I would suggest, but then when you mentioned Sidney Lumet, that's when it clicked for me. And I would suggest Dog Day Afternoon, a movie that I just recently rewatched. And the reason why I would recommend it is because it is another sort of example of like a bottle episode. Like that movie essentially takes place in one location, but feels incredibly cinematic.
Right.
Also features a young Al Pacino.
Yeah.
In one of his best performances.
Totally.
But I also remember the very first time I saw it, I was like, oh, this could be a really cool, like, stage adaptation. Like, if you could figure out a way to adapt this to a stage play, it could be really, really cool. So, yeah, again, Sidney Lumet, one of my favorite filmmakers. I think that's such an incredible film. I think it does an incredible job of, again, sort of taking these characters that are deeply flawed, but have you sort of rooting for them and showing the humanity in deeply flawed individuals. Incredible performances all around. Like every single person in that movie is phenomenal. So yeah, I you know, it's not a movie about sales, and again, it's not sort of playing in, like you were saying, the idea of like a movie for bros who take away the wrong ideas, but there are similarities in the sort of filmmaking style and the characters that I think could make for an interesting pairing.
Nice. And
also too, it's one of those movies that like it's to call it like it is entertaining, but it's also incredibly like devastating. And by the end of it, you're like, I've only seen it a couple times because like it's a tough watch.
Yeah, for sure. Much like this. One other one I'll throw out there because it's kind of a fun connection point. How about American Psycho? Which is kind of about the Blake character, right?
Yes.
It's sort of Alec
100%.
Baldwin's character taken to the creepiest, craziest degree, basically. But it's all the preoccupations that Alec Baldwin has in this movie. It comes through in American Psycho as well, but has that sort of satirical touch. Definitely critical of sort of capitalism at large and the sort of excesses of it and the paradoxes of it. So I feel like that could also be an interesting thematic connection to this one, even though it's a very different movie in certain ways.
Yeah, I just rewatched that a couple months ago, and very much not my cup of tea, but again, like you said, like completely encapsulates that character and it is worth seeing that movie just for Christian Bale's performance. It is a star-making performance in a weird way because it's not a glamorous star type role, but
it's the role that got him like, Batman, right?
Yeah, exactly. It's a role that makes you go, oh, this is one of the greatest actors of our generation.
For sure.
So,
for sure.
Yeah, very interesting parallel. Well, that brings us to the end of this episode of the Springfield Googleplex, the movie podcast for Simpson fans. And thank you so much for joining us. And I promise you, the rest of the season, we're not as punch drunk as we were tonight. But having said that, if you enjoyed what you heard or have heard in the past, please leave us a review and share this episode with the Simpson fans and film buffs in your life. It really does make more of a difference than you can imagine. And we've also set up a support page on our website where if you want, you can throw us a couple of bucks to help cover the costs of making this show. The US to Canadian dollar exchange rate for all of these US-based web services that we use is genuinely killing us. So thanks, Obama. Yeah, so no obligation, but, you know, every little bit helps. And if every person listening threw in just like a couple of bucks, we'd be able to actually cover some of these costs and we wouldn't be out of pocket to bring this show to you. Not that we, you know, would stop making this show, but it is a labor of love. But
it would help.
You know, it would help. So thank you for joining us, and be sure to tune in next week where we're starting to kick off Spooktober.
Ooh.
And we've got a great episode with a great guest lined up, so you definitely don't want to miss that. we will be talking about the, well, there's really only one way to put this. The most cursed movie probably ever that we'll cover, Twilight Zone, the movie. It's going to be an interesting conversation, to say the very least. But please do tune in. And until next time, Nate,
we'll see you around the Plex.
See you around the Plex. Hi, everybody.
Sorry, you should start that one more time. I was making some kind of groaning noise.
Oh, okay. And it was such a good impression, too. Not really. 3, 2, 1. I also, welcome back to season... What are we up to now? Season 6? I think this is season 6, Nate.
Sorry, I'm eating something. Yeah. I think... Sorry. This is messy. Messy premiere to the season.
And The Rookies is such a generic title that, like, you wouldn't necessarily even catch that that's what he's saying.
And it's not one that, like, people talk about in the same way that they talk about, like, Dragnet.
Yeah, literally never heard of it. Like, my dad has maybe, if I were to bring it up to my dad, he might be like, oh, yeah, of course, that aired on ABC on Thursday nights or something like that. Right. But, yeah, no, I have obviously never heard of it, so...
I'm looking it up. It looks like a 70s cop show.
Yeah, exactly. And where did it air? It was on ABC. Go figure. Yeah. But it doesn't say what night did it air on.
Is this important?
Well, if I said it aired on ABC on Thursday nights and it actually aired on Thursday nights, that would be pretty.
That's true. That would be
pretty
a good
impressive.
Call.
Here, let's see here. What's September 11th, 1972. Let's find out what that was. That was a... Do you remember that day?
This is great podcasting.
We're doing a real good episode tonight. It was a Monday. Okay.
Looking up rookies.
Well, look, I gotta be honest with you. I don't think I have much to say about the movie, so like I'm padding this out as best as I can, folks. We'll see. Okay. Well, is there anything else you want to talk about in the episode before we talk about the movie?
I just want to make sure we close the loop on whatever we were talking about.
The rookies. We were talking about the rookies.
We were talking about the rookies. More specifically, the rookies. Right. So it's a very okay. All right.
We've already recorded three or four other episodes. I can assure our audience they get much better.
I know. Somehow the ones we recorded first are a little bit more like focused than this one.
Well, they had guests. That's why they had to be focused.
We were like, we got to be a professional. We get all like punch drunk when we are. It's just
yeah,
the two of us.
Exactly. Okay. No, I mean, it's